I'm Professor Kiran Fernandez from the University of Durham. And over the last decade, I've been trying to understand how disruptive technologies like digital games can be used not just for entertainment, but also for benefit of society and science. And on this journey, I've been particularly focusing on trying to understand how and why business models emerge within the games sector. Now, digital technologies, in particular digital games, have had a huge impact on young people and is increasingly making an impact on other parts of society. So why are digital games so popular? Well, one simple answer is games are fun. However, there's more to this story. There are 4 reasons why games are becoming so popular. The first is the rise in social media. Look at the rise in social media. Something like 2 billion people are active users on Facebook. If you consider Facebook as a digital country, it would probably be the biggest country on earth. But this trend is not just with one particular technology like Facebook, it's with Google+, Twitter, Instagram, and the likes of such social media sites. The second reason is the popularity of the mobile phone as a revolution. Studies have shown that 65% of people on earth have a mobile phone, and almost 100% of people on earth have access to a mobile phone. This has allowed colleagues and citizens to have access to games through mobile technology. The third reason is the growth and advent of big data analytics. What I mean by this is large amounts of data sets can be analyzed, accessed, and then presented to citizens in a very interesting way. As I said earlier, 1.2 billion people are playing games regularly. I'll just take an example of one game called League of Legends. 27 million people play this game daily. And one of the reasons for this is because, which is the fourth reason, and that is the advent of variable computing. Clearly, mobile phones are all over the place, but with the advent of new technology, like smart technology on mobile phones, smart technology on watches, and even clothes, people have access to data at literally their fingertips. So these 4 reasons together have made digital games very successful. Now, from a business perspective, the UK as a country has emerged as a major player after the US and Japan. The revenues in the UK exceed over 3 billion. And this exceeds far more the revenues from DVD, music, the box office collectively. So what is the future of games? And how will technologies like artificial intelligence make not only games more fun, but also affect society and science? To answer these questions, I have with me today a colleague and a friend, Professor Peter Cowling from the University of York. Professor Cowling is a renowned international scholar for his work in artificial intelligence and in particular decision-making in games. He leads the EPSRC's, which is the Research Council's, Digital Creativity Labs at the University of York, and over the last decade or so received millions of pounds of funding to study computational intelligence in games and their impact to society and science. So Peter, over 1.2 billion people play games worldwide, and this number is going to increase further. So is this making us more social, or perhaps less social, or even antisocial?
Okay, so, in terms of social connection, there are all sorts of social connections all around the world, that have arisen through games. So people in different countries playing games that wouldn't have known each other. I know of many examples now of people that have got together face to face after they've been friends in a game. So I think that you'd have to see games as a good thing. Now, one of the reasons that games get a bad press, and maybe part of the reason for your question, is that there's this vision of the person in their bedroom at home not engaging with the real world and only engaging with the virtual world. Now, that's a problem, yeah, because games can't replace our need for human contact. We need to be with each other, we need to have face-to-face relationships, and games can't replace that. But honestly, for those introverted people that may find it harder to make social contacts through, I don't know, going to pubs and nightclubs and this sort of thing, then I think it's a way for them to share a common interest with other people, and hopefully that leads to healthy interactive relationships face-to-face as well as in-game relationships.
That was a great answer, Peter. Thank you. Well, I have another follow-up question there. Can you tell us how digital games is making an impact on society and science in particular?
So that's a really good time to ask me this question. A couple of days ago, we published an article which in a journal called PLOS ONE, which is a collaboration between computer scientists and psychologists. We analysed the data from more than 20,000 people playing 4 mainstream games. And what we find is that there's a correlation between their performance in the game and their IQ as measured by standard pencil and paper IQ tests. And also that the behaviour of their performance in the game follows the longitudinal pattern that we would expect with age of IQ. So an interpretation of that is that games can be used to test IQ. Yeah, and I think that that's a sensible interpretation. There's no direction of causality there. We're not saying games make you smarter or smarter people are better at games. Yeah, there might be some other reason, but certainly we have this possibility of measuring intelligence and possibly other behaviours using games. Now, why would we want to do that? Because of the scale. We can do this at enormous scale. You mentioned in your previous question the billions of people that are playing games. So now we can measure intelligence, social anxiety, other factors using performance in games. And we can do it at a population level. So it means that, I don't know, some of the issues around anonymity and you know, who's looking at my data, well, we don't need to do that. We can look at the performance of a whole town. The thought experiment that we do here is the story of Flint, Michigan. In Flint, Michigan, there was lead pollution in the groundwater supply. Now, lead is a neurotoxin and it impairs cognitive performance. In principle, the lead pollution could have been detected earlier by monitoring the cognitive performance in a game of the population of the town of Flint. Now, we didn't do that, but if we had had the data and the techniques that we now have, in principle, we could look town by town and we could spot, let's say, things that were worth investigating further. So I think that in terms of its impact on science and especially on psychology and social science and its social impact, I think games have really great potential. So the other thing that I'd like to talk about is the use of games directly as a tool to do science. And here, when you have scientific experiments that require large amounts of computation, often there's a step in that computation which is frankly best done or can only be done by people. Yeah, the most obvious case there is where you need to understand people's preferences. But there's another case of a game called Fold It. And Fold It is a game which encouraged people to play with blobs on a screen, but playing with the blobs on the screen and solving the puzzles actually was giving scientists information about the structure of proteins. Now, there's a very famous article in this area, published in the journal Nature, where there are 70,000 authors. Yeah, there are the people that created Fold It and the 70,000 players who played the game. And that article elucidates the structure of a particular protein that's implicated in the disease AIDS. So I think that there's this other possibility of using the sort of the cognitive abilities of game players directly to do science.
That was a very interesting finding from your paper, and I will make it a point to read it. Peter, you're an expert in artificial intelligence. What do you think the role of artificial intelligence is in the next generation of games and games design?
So, exciting times for AI. AI is my field. This is what got me into games. And I suppose I should say that actually I've been making AI for games since I was about 7 years old. So I'm quite an enthusiast in this area. I started professionally working in AI for games about 10 years ago. And if you had asked me then, for certain games, how far are we off having really strong players for these games, I would have said decades. Yeah? So in particular, there's an Oriental game called Go. And the game of Go is a game that I've worked on a little and played quite a lot. And I think 5 years ago, if you'd asked me or any number of other experts, how far are we away from superhuman play for this game, I'd have said 2 or 3 decades at best. Now, in those past 5 years, Google and DeepMind have poured enormous resource into creating superhuman players for this game. And recently they announced that they have a superhuman player which can start from no knowledge of the game other than the game rules. Now, that player, and that's really exciting, especially because Go is a game that needs creativity. Yeah, it's not a kind of a number crunchy, simple strategic game. It requires grand strategy. It requires thinking on a level that most humans would associate directly with human creativity. So we're putting together machine learning and decision search. So machine learning, where you're looking at data and you're using that data to train a computational structure, I think called a neural network, but that's not so important, which allows you to learn the things that you should do or the predictions that you should make from the data. And decision search, where you're looking into the space of future possibilities to make decisions now, which lead to future possibilities which are stronger and better. We're working with a UK company, AI Factory, and they've given us the data for thousands of their mobile card games. And what we found in our work is that we can use that data to create players that play very much like an average human. Yeah? And interesting that an average human play does sort of exist is something that we found. And except that every once in a while an average human player makes a blunder. So our AI usually plays like an average human, but it has, in the background, it corrects an occasional mistake. And in fact, the play that we have is indistinguishable from that of an average human in measurable ways, but quite a lot stronger than that average human. So I think that points to a sort of an exciting possibility of new engaging gameplay, but using the sort of combination of machine learning and decision search, so that you have good strategic behaviours, interesting strategic behaviours that create fun and engaging experiences, but that there's some tech there that means that you can do things that most people couldn't do in that situation.
Well, Peter, you heard this many times. Violent content in games, it's been in the media. There's also speculation that this makes people more aggressive. So from your perspective, how is technology evolving that is trying to keep a control on these issues, particularly violent games? And is it going to reduce behaviour in general society?
So, violent games are something which I have played myself, and I choose not to play them so much now. I think that one of the reasons for prevalence of violence in games is a fundamental human need to engage in combat, which for many of us is conversational sparring or maybe sport, but obviously it satisfies that need as well. I think there's a huge difference between games that use things that may be regarded as violent, let's say in a strategic context, and games which attempt to recreate some sort of visceral thrill of killing another human. I think that second is very disturbing. And I, as a trend, I think that we have to look hard at whether we want to have those sorts of games. And certainly we need good censorship. The thing that's likely to change is that as our technology gets better, and especially as AI gets better, then we're going to have agents that can interact with people in much richer ways. Yeah, one of the reasons why violence is so prevalent in games is lazy game design. Yeah, it's really easy to interact with somebody that looks sort of like a monster, or maybe even sort of like a human, and you just blow them away, and that's the end of your interaction. Much harder to engage in conversation, in let's say in detection, in following somebody, in understanding their motivations and behaviour. So it's much harder to do that. So do games cause people to be violent? Well, violent people play games, and maybe games provide a useful outlet for that violence that's more socially acceptable than other outlets that they might consider down the pub on a Saturday night. Many people play games, billions of people play games. So there are bound to be people of all different characters and proclivities that play games. I don't believe that there is a strong causal relationship, and I see no strong evidence for such a relationship.
What an interesting answer there, Peter. So in the future, how are games going to revolutionize science in general?
In a very real sense, I think all online games are going to revolutionize science. We have access to this massive wealth of behavioral data that we haven't had before. And I think that sociologists and psychologists and economists have this new data source which will teach them things about people and their behaviour at a scale that was hitherto impossible. So I think that especially those three branches of science will be revolutionised. And what we see now is early adopters that are doing really interesting things using game data. I think if we have this conversation in 10 years' time, we'll find that games and online interactive media are standard tools in these large-scale experiments. So the other thing that I'd say is that games entertain, and I think that entertainment is key. One of the axes of entertainment, there are potentially negative axes, but the most positive one is it provides fun. Yeah, it provides enjoyment, and ideally it makes people more happy. I think that one of the ways that games, interactive media, and in fact the online experience needs to move is towards this idea of more deliberately trying to make people more happy. So if we look at the rise of recommender systems, so Amazon and Google lead the way here. So if I go on Amazon, I get recommended products that I might like to buy, and socially that's quite acceptable. But what about if we had a recommender system which instead analysed the things that made people that are like you or that have your preferences happy, and recommended actions and which would increase your own levels of happiness? And I think that there can be a revolution here. I think that together with my colleagues, we're trying to sort of spearhead the idea that happiness can have a scientific approach, and that games are an excellent way to engage people in that and to help them to be more happy.
Thank you, Peter, for that excellent series of answers and for this time and this interview. So it's clear that stakeholders ranging from game players to businesses to the wider society can benefit from games. This technology is disruptive, it's shown to be disruptive, and it's helping us solve big problems, global challenges. Challenges that we all collectively want to address? For example, the Sustainable Development Goals 2030. How can we as a global population work together on a large scale, perhaps conducting large scale experiments to test some economic theory? Or perhaps to answer, how can the Sustainable Development Goals be achieved across 169 odd countries? We hope you can see more about the work we are trying to do on our webpage, which is www.digitalcreativity, that's one word, .ac.uk. Thank you very much.